let me start now with the survey results and start by thanking the 85 luminaries who participated this year during July, when we always have the survey. And this is the most participation we've ever had. They represented 47 different companies. The distribution is shown there in the pie chart, which has been consistent across all 12 surveys, with about 2/3 representing either the mass manufacturing, shown in green, or equipment, shown in purple. We had 17 questions this year, 9 of which were new. So I'm going to give you just a few of these key takeaways before we get into the details. In general, the luminaries were very confident about broad, or meaning more than one company, adopting high NA EUV by 2028. Also, on the curvilinear front, the confidence increased for the leading edge mask shops being able to handle whatever the demand is for curvilinear. And they also reaffirmed that curvilinear masks aren't just for EUV, that they're useful for 193i as well. And finally, on the business front, luminaries were more confident about 2023 mask revenues than SEMI, who have predicted a 3% contraction this year. So I'm going to start on that point to go through then the detailed results. And of course, I get to save all the fun discussion to the panel later. So in this chart, you see that on the right-hand side, we've got 83% of the luminaries say the market size will stay the same, shown in the blue, or increase, shown in the green piece of the pie. And that leaves 17% who said it would decrease. When you look at that compared to last year, in the pie chart on the left, you can see the luminaries are not as optimistic, but they're certainly more optimistic than the SEMI prediction of a 3% contraction. So now let me switch and look at some of the survey questions behind the confidence in EUV. So in a repeat question, we see that 82% predict that high NA EUV will be first used in high volume by 2027. Gold represents this year's survey result, and blue last year's. That's a scheme we use throughout the presentation. And you can see the results are similar to last year. And then, of course, what's the view in terms of broad adoption, meaning more than one company? Well, in a repeat question, we see that confidence remains high. It's very similar to last year, with 80% saying high NA EUV will be in use by more than one company by 2028 or before. So this year we added some new questions to look at some of the technical issues or questions behind high NA EUV. In the first new question, we found that 71% say the minimum mask dimension is 20 nanometers or less. And a further 23% say it will be 25 nanometers or less. In the past year, there's been a lot of discussion about circular masks, now large format mask sizes. So we added a question. Guess what? It's a dead heat. We had a third show in the green so that they would agree that the statement is indicate your level of agreement with the masks will be larger in dimensions. And then a third said they neither agreed or disagreed, and a third said they strongly disagreed. So I know this has been discussed at the conference, and so I'm gladly going to turn that one over to the panel to talk about in more detail. So I'm going to move on to writing EUV masks. So in the second row of the chart, we see that 95% of the luminaries agree that multi-beam mask writers are needed to write EUV masks. And then in the statement above, we found that 82% agree that multi-beam mask writers are more accurate, precise, as compared to leading-edge VSB writers. Another critical area for EUV has been pellicles. And we know that some EUV masks don't have pellicles, so additional masks have to be made. So in a new question, we found that 75% said for EUV masks without pellicles, 2 to 3 masks would be produced for each layer. And then a further 25% said 4 or more masks, with some even saying 10 or more. Okay, so that's going to be a really interesting one for the panel. I'll wait to hear what they say about that. We had one more new question about EUV pellicles. This one we had 52% say that the transmission rate at which most 0.33 NA EUV masks will end up with pellicles is 90% or greater. And the majority of those answers were in the 90 to 95% range. But you also see there's quite a wide distribution of answers to this one. And that may explain why we have, well, there was an issue with the question, which may explain why I had the distribution. We didn't give the respondents the choice to say no option or no opinion. So let's go on to another important topic for EUV masks, and that's inspection. So in a new question, we found that the weighted average of Luminaries input was that 30% of EUV production masks are inspected with actinic today. That's shown in the gold, and a prediction that it will double to over 60% in 3 years, shown in the purple. The distribution of the answers are shown in the charts below. Now, when we talked about EUV during last year's event, the panelists all agreed, yes, EUV is just more expensive, but they weren't very specific. Now we've just heard an excellent viewpoint from Glenn on what that actually looks like, at least for Micron. But we included a question to see what the opinions would be for specific equipment, materials, and software. So the majority of the luminaries, as shown by the green responses, say that all 7 aspects that we ask about are more expensive than for 193i. The way to read the chart, the dark green shows who said greater than 5x more expensive. The medium green is up to 5x, and the light green is up to 2x. Gray means the same cost, and orange means cheaper. So the 7 areas you can see are listed from the top, OPC, ILT, down to mask blanks. Okay, so I'm going to switch to some non-EUV questions. In a newly worded question, in the top line of the chart, we can see that 63% said investment in mask inspection tools for 193i only would increase over the next 3 years. And below that, we see 77% said multi-beam mask writer investment would increase, again, only for 193i. Although not a majority, we also found that 31% said investment in VSB writers would increase, and 41% who said investment in laser writers would increase. Okay, so now I'll turn to a repeat question on deep learning. By looking at this year's result on the bottom in gold, we see that 56% are saying that 2024 or before is when capabilities based on deep learning will become a competitive advantage for any step in mass. So we finally now see that the predictions are no longer shifting into the future for deep learning in mask making. Okay, so we've mentioned non-EUV leading edge several times, but at what node are we really talking about? So we ask a new question to capture the opinion on what node fabs using 193i reach a practical limit of economic viability. The gold is the answer for 2023 or today, and the purple is for 2030. And what you can see is that the luminaries basically gave a consistent range for both timeframes, less than or equal to 14 nanometers, but greater than 5 nanometers. Okay, then the final section, I'm going to turn to the ILT and curvilinear mask questions. So in a new question, we sought to validate some of the past results that where would curvilinear ILT be used? And what we found in the top line is that 70% of the luminaries agree that curvilinear ILT is useful for 193I non-EUV leading edge nodes. And in the bottom line, you see that 75% agree it's needed for 2 nanometer logic using 0.33 NA EUV. We've asked about ILT usage for the past 7 years. And you can see the history in this chart. The gold represents this year's response. And then moving to the left, you get the earlier responses all the way back to 2017 in the light blue. And the interesting data point for me to pull out and mention to you is that this year, 46% circled said some critical layers, as opposed to only a few, will use ILT, versus 35% who said that last year. And in a repeat question, we found really no major change in the ranking of the curvilinear mask-making concerns. The top concern is mask shop software infrastructure, shown on the far left. Mask inspection was ranked second again, and mask metrology moved to third this year, swapping places with ILT software, now at number 4. As with last year, access to multi-beam mask writers moved down to number 5, although we see some of the same observations we made last year. When you look at the distribution inside the rectangle, you see that for some, clearly, the lack of a multi-beam mask writer is still a top concern. And then finally, mask repair ranked 6th out of the 6. Ultimately, the question is whether these barriers are insurmountable. And this year we found no one thinks they're insurmountable. We also found that the confidence had doubled from 16 to 32% in handling whatever the demand is, not just a limited number of curvilinear masks. And overall, the confidence increased with 87% who said leading edge mask shops could handle some limited number of curvilinear masks. So again, in conclusion, luminaries remain confident in 2 really important areas for the mask community, high-NA EUV and curvilinear. So I want to close by just saying a big thank you to all those who participated in the survey. We can't do it without you.